I'm excited to introduce today's session titled Nonprofit RFP Prudent Process to Select a Financial Advisor. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, David Brommelkamp, Chief Executive Officer of Allodium Investment Consultants. David's more detailed bio is available within the webinar platform. Dave, thank you so much in advance for your presentation. And at this point, I'll turn the session over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Welcome to our presentation today. I'm Dave Brommelkamp. I want to thank FI360 for the opportunity to deliver this presentation. Today, we'll focus on how to help a nonprofit organization with a prudent RFP process to select a financial advisor. I plan to help you learn how to use third-party resources like Broadridge's FI360 resources to develop an RFP for a prudent process to select a financial advisor with a primary focus on selecting an investment management consultant. We want to help your nonprofit organization to fulfill their fiduciary obligations under the law. We want to help nonprofit organizations to prove stewardship to their donors and the greater community at large, and to enjoy the benefits of improved financial stewardship, lower investment fees, simplified quarterly review meetings, and staff time saved so the staff can work on your more important priorities. There are many other hidden benefits to having your organization adopt a prudent process to select a new financial advisor. This is an educational presentation about how your nonprofit organization might want to develop an RFP process for selecting a financial advisor. It's not intended to provide legal or tax advice or specific investment recommendations. As a heads up, I've created about a dozen one-page educational resource tools that you will see in today's presentation. Some of them are provided as a PDF file in the links, but you can also download these AdvisorSmart documents for free on the AdvisorSmart website. If you're a multitasker, you might look up some of these documents as I go through today's presentation. Yesterday, I timed out my presentation and realized I was trying to get 8 hours of material into 1 hour. So what I did is I tried to provide the handouts that would allow you to learn above and beyond just this PowerPoint presentation. The idea for this presentation came out of a discussion I had with John Faustino about creating more specialized educational content for FI360 designees outside of the ERISA specialty area. And as you probably already know, most nonprofit organizations are struggling to find a good financial advisor. I think that we can use the FI360 and CFEX materials to help nonprofit organizations to find financial advisors. I'm the author of a new book with the tentative title of AdvisorSmart for the Individual Investor, which is a guide for selecting a financial advisor, and it's scheduled to be released in the summer of 2024 next year. A second book is in the development stage on the prudent process for selecting a financial advisor for a nonprofit organization, which led me to create a lot of the content for this presentation. That second book has the tentative title of AdvisorSmart for the Nonprofit Investor and will be probably released in the summer of 2025. Many FI360 designees work either directly for a nonprofit organization and or with individual investors who sit on nonprofit boards. 74% of FI360 designees focus on wealth management, and 17% work with foundations. So when you think about who does this presentation apply to, almost everyone is somehow touching a nonprofit organization, whether it's through their family members, friends, or volunteer board members who happen to be family members or friends, or clients. So our first survey question for today that we would like to consider is going to be, do you and or any of your friends, family members, or any of your individual clients serve on the board of directors of a nonprofit organization? So if you can think about this for 10 seconds and give us an answer, do you or any of your friends, family members, or your clients serve on the board of directors of a nonprofit organization? You can go ahead and answer that question. Okay, we got about 40% responded so far. Okay, so of the audience, with half the attendees responding here, about 75% of you have some type of relationship with the world of the nonprofit board member. So the questions to the lack of a trusted financial advisor can seem like a big problem for a nonprofit organization. I'm going to address this presentation as if I were explaining an optimal or prudent process for a hypothetical nonprofit organization where I serve on their board of directors or their finance committee or their investment subcommittee. And so some of the questions you ask is, are you looking for objective advice, from your financial advisor, or do you want your financial advisor to be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission? And then what could be a thoughtful process of elimination to reduce the pool of potential financial advisors that you would need to vet? I've split this presentation into 3 sections. As most nonprofit leaders have experience with RFPs, I'm not going to dedicate too much about how they have to do an RFP. I will go through that in sections, the second and third section. But I'm going to spend about half the time on the first third of the process, which is the internal preparations that a nonprofit should be working on to figure out how to go through this RFP process. So I've watched over the years as nonprofit organizations search for a financial advisor, almost in the same way that a new 5-year-old swimmer splashes around in a swimming pool as they learn how to swim. So this presentation is meant to help enlighten nonprofit board members about the various types of financial advisors to look for as they're looking for financial advice. Again, educational resources available to you in the links are going to be a number of one-page handouts describing things like the process, the timeline, etc. The first and probably most important one-page handout I'm going to kind of share with you is what I call the nonprofit RFP process. And the nonprofit RFP process is a journey, so you need a map or an outline to follow. The first Advisor Smart document that I'll share with you on the right here is a one-page outline of the nonprofit RFP process. This is one of the PDF files in the presentation links, and it might be helpful to have this file open as we go through the presentation. There's 3 parts to the process. The first is your internal preparations. The second is developing your RFP. The third is selecting your advisor. And each of these 3 sections I've broken down into 12 different steps. So there's 12 steps in each of these 3 phases of the process. These are the 36 logical steps for a nonprofit to follow in a prudent process to select a financial advisor. And I've planned my presentation today to go through the 36 steps in this prudent process, as I said, with a particular emphasis on the first phase, which is the internal preparations. This is a more detailed look at the same document that might be helpful if you look at a copy of this PowerPoint presentation later. Here's a sample RFP timeline, and I've taken the 3-step RFP process and the 36 specific steps and placed them into a 9-month timeline. And the nonprofit RFP process is a big project that may take the nonprofit organization many months to get the job done right. So this is my sample RFP timeline, which is actually, I think, a 9-month timeline. But like Abraham Lincoln says, plan to put a lot of time into planning your work to make the execution of your task much more efficient. The first part of our presentation will focus on the first third of the RFP process and is focused on the internal preparations to develop a thoughtful RFP. As most nonprofit organizations already know how to develop RFPs for various service providers, I'll dedicate more than half of today's presentation on the internal preparations needed to develop an RFP. While most nonprofit leaders already know how to execute on an RFP, the internal preparations for a specific type of RFP are what make the RFP process much more effective and efficient. So we're going to try to focus the nonprofit leaders on what's so special about financial advisors as opposed to other types of RFPs that they might be doing. Most nonprofit organizations, as I said, they don't really have a good idea about how the financial field is organized, and they can easily be taken advantage of by sales-oriented financial advisory firms. Nonprofit leaders need to invest time in learning how to vet the various types of financial advisors. The internal preparation stage of the RFP process is where the nonprofit should dedicate adequate time and energy to learn how to be a better consumer of financial advice and how to learn how to approach the world of financial advisors. Step one in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to make a decision to look for an advisor. The organization needs to believe that outside financial advice is needed by the nonprofit organization. There's a lot of different players in the world of financial advice, custodians, brokers, advisors. So the question is, are you clear on who these players are, and do you understand what all of these financial service providers do? Also on the investment side, do you understand risk and return, asset allocation? Do you have time to do the work? Do you want to do this on your own, or do you want to maybe outsource the work? If you're not experts, it would probably be wise to find and hire a professional fiduciary financial advisor who can help you to navigate the complexities of the financial field. The decision to look for a financial advisor usually will emanate from a disorganized and unhappy board of directors and staff who need help from a financial advisor. Step two in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to make a decision to use an RFP process. Now, why would a nonprofit organization want to develop a prudent, disciplined, and repeatable RFP process when selecting a financial advisor? The first is you have fiduciary obligations under the law. The second would be you have an obligation to be good stewards of the money and kind of prove financial stewardship. And the third is you have donors watching you, and they want to see the financial stewardship of your organization. If you refer to the prudent practices outlined by FI 360, practice 3.1 states that a prudent due diligence process is followed to select each service provider. If you want to learn more about fiduciary best practices, you will be able to find a copy of the prudent practices at the FI 360 website that is listed at the end of this presentation. Step three in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to clarify governance related to your RFP process. Clarify the board and staff roles and the decision makers related to the RFP process. Form an RFP subcommittee, and then put someone in charge by appointing one person to oversee the development of the RFP. This person needs to be knowledgeable about the organization and has to have enough time to devote to the project. That person will work collaboratively with a small RFP subcommittee, including representatives from different aspects of the organization. Step four in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to clarify your needs, wants, and desires. These two one-pagers are available on the AdvisorSmart website, and I think I included them with my handouts. If not, they're on the website. But be specific. One of the most important goals of the RFP document is to be specific in what your organization is and is not looking for. So you have to define your needs, wants, and nice to haves. It's like building a house. If you start building a house and you haven't decided how many bedrooms you want, how many bathrooms you want, whether you want to have a deck or not. It doesn't make any sense to start your process without clearly defined objectives about what you need, what you want, and what you think might be a nice to have. The next 3 slides here, what I've done is provided a little bit bigger slides here that'll be helpful for you. This one is on the needs, this one is on the wants, and this one is on the nice to haves. And so you can see a more detailed look at the same document that I broke out here, and it might be helpful if you look at a copy of this PowerPoint presentation later. Step 5 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP is to update your internal documents. The nonprofit has to invest the time necessary to get your house in order and update your governing documents before you start developing your formal RFP document. This would include things like your investment policy statement, your spending policy statement, gift acceptance policy, and conflict of interest policy. Step 6 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to review your fiduciary obligations. It might be appealing to hire an investment manager based on their most recent 5-year performance numbers, but is that a prudent process? You have to take the time to review your fiduciary obligations under the law and educate your board members about these responsibilities. Nonprofit leaders can use the FI 360 and CFEX materials to help their organization to find better financial advisors. And as I said earlier, there's a link to the FI 360 website at the end of this presentation. This one, I'm gonna go to my notes here. Step 7 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit process is to review RFP best practices. You're advised to adopt the best practices for your RFP process, decision-making, and documentation using a prudent, disciplined, and repeatable process. I'd like to point out to all nonprofit leaders that the CFEX Mark of Excellence is available for endowments, foundations, and charities. And you'll find a link to the CFEX website at the end of this presentation. I'd also like here to make a shout out to 4 FI 360 designees who helped me with the content for this presentation. Mark Mensack, Larry Coates, Kate McBride, and Alan Henriquez. All of them contributed some really good ideas to help me in the development of this presentation. Step 8 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to identify advisor pools. The number of financial advisors in the United States is a really big number. You can use government websites that will identify licensed brokers and advisors, and you can actually go to websites and download lists of firms. This is one of the hardest things for the nonprofit organization to deal with, because if they're going to send out an RFP, you cannot send it out to hundreds of thousands of advisors or tens of thousands of firms. You have to figure out a way to kind of whittle down the list. But this starting process of identify the advisor pools is like drinking water from a fire hose. It's unwieldy for the nonprofit board at the outset. The investment advisor public disclosure website has you have the ability to do the FINRA broker check to indicate whether a firm is a brokerage firm. Investment advisors file their Form ADVs to register with the SEC and the states. And then the Form ADV contains information about an investment advisor and its business operations. It also includes disclosure about disciplinary events involving the advisor and key personnel. So this is the starting point for searching for the financial advisors, is who's registered with the government to provide financial advice. Why would nonprofit investors be confused about how to select an appropriate financial advisor? There's not a lot of regulation about what a financial advisor can call themselves. There's a lot of different titles, and people make up whatever kind of title they think sounds good. But it's important to realize that when the nonprofit is looking at all the financial advisors in the United States, in order for them to get really clear about what they're looking for, they have to understand kind of how these advisors are regulated and what they actually do. So let's start with the end in mind. Step 9 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to start a process of elimination by sector. And so I put in I think about the next 22 slides here coming up are all focused on how the nonprofit organization can have a quantitative, evidence-based process of elimination to reduce the pool of thousands of financial advisors and firms into a handful of appropriate firms to include in their RFP process. We all probably want the attributes of a trusted financial advisor in the advisor that we hire for our nonprofit. So the question we want to ask is, how can we start a prudent process of elimination with appropriate quantitative factors? To protect your organization, it would be prudent to limit your financial advisor search to independent advice from fee-only fiduciary advisors. Survey your board of directors and the investment committee at the front end of the process for their input on their priorities and preferences. With thousands of financial advisory firms and hundreds of thousands of individual financial advisors, what are the factors, or how can we develop a systematized and quantitative approach to weeding out the sources of advice that do not meet our needs? For FI 360 designees, they'll probably they'll enjoy this comment I can make, or this analogy. At my investment firm, we use the evidence-based FI 360 fiduciary-focused toolkit to reduce the universe of 40,000 plus investment managers, mutual funds, and ETFs to create a very much smaller recommended list of about 50 recommended investments. So if you're familiar with this toolkit and how it works, using quantitative factors, let's take a look at a very similar process of elimination for financial advisory firms based on quantitative evidence-based data. I created a sample elimination factors worksheet for you, and you may or may not agree with my factors, but what I'm doing and what I'll go through in the next number of slides is things that you can use to come up with this process of elimination that can be something that a group of nonprofit board members can agree with. Some of them are very quantitative, like are you registered with as a broker, as an advisor, et cetera. But other elimination factors that might come into the play might be things like, do we want a local advisor? Do we want a male or female advisor? Do we want a solo or a team? What kind of designations do we want? Those are all potential elimination factors for a nonprofit to consider. There are three main sectors of financial advisors based on how they are regulated and compensated. Our first evidence-based quantitative questions could be, how is the financial advisor regulated? Is the financial advisor an investment advisor representative and or registered as a registered representative with FINRA? So as the next slides I go through, I'm going to kind of go through them quickly, primarily so I can give you the images, which some of them will be self-explanatory. But the factors are all related to how a financial advisor is compensated. Reason we focus on compensation is the compensation sometimes creates a conflict of interest with the consumer or the investor, the nonprofit organization. There are three types of financial advisors based on compensation models. We have brokers, fee-based broker advisors, and then fee-only advisors. The The first evidence-based selection criteria would be to eliminate advisors based on compensation methods that you want to avoid. Most institutional investors want to pay their financial advisors for objective financial advice as opposed to advice from financial advisors who might have a conflict of interest based on the sale of financial products. Most people would probably agree that brokers have an obvious conflict of interest with their clients, with the commission-based compensation based on the sale of commission-based products. That might be my belief. We can agree to disagree on that. This is just a factor that somebody might be looking at when they're a consumer of financial advice. This diagram provides some contrast between the various types of financial advisors based on their methods of compensation. As we begin our process of elimination, our fairly logical first step or first cut is to eliminate commission-based brokers. My apologies to any commission-based brokers, but that's just going to be part of our sample elimination process today. I personally think that nonprofit organizations should avoid using a stockbroker for financial advice. So that to me is like one of the first easy cuts to go through. A practical way to identify if a financial advisor is a registered representative of a brokerage firm is to look up their name on the broker check by FINRA. They're the broker check website on FINRA. You can look up the names of both individual financial advisors and also financial advisory firms. A second step to cut more advisors from your RFP candidate pool list is to eliminate hybrid two-hat broker advisors. Hybrid two-hat fee-based broker advisors are financial advisors who work for financial advisory firms that are duly registered as both advisors and brokers at the same time. There was the question would be, why do you want to eliminate hybrid fee-based broker advisors? And there's a pretty good research report on this by Nicole Boyson, which you can find on the AdvisorSmart website. And that kind of gives you some arguments for why the nonprofit might want to avoid hybrid fee-based broker advisors in their search. Now, this is kind of a controversial elimination factor because the duly registered advisors actually represent more than 80% of the assets managed by advisors. And so based on assets managed, the hybrid two-hat fee-based broker advisors represent the vast majority of investment portfolios managed. And so the nonprofit leaders will need to think very clearly about this issue before deciding to eliminate this group of financial advisors from their search. The duly registered two-hat broker advisory firms can be advisors in the morning and then brokers in the afternoon. And this setup is dangerous for the nonprofit organization looking for objective financial advice. It could lead to a bait and switch approach when using financial advice as the bait and then product sales as the switch. There's a lot of great advisors that work as hybrid fee-based broker advisors, but this is an issue where sometimes you just got to be aware of what the conflicts of interest are, and you have to decide whether you're willing to tolerate that as an investor or not. I drew up this one as an example of, if I were a fish, I would choose to swim in a lake where no fishing is allowed. You can see the little no fishing allowed is the small pond at the bottom there. Same analogy for investors is, if you were an investor, which lake would you choose? And personally, I would recommend that you include only fee-only financial advisors in your nonprofit RFP. Now, many on this call might disagree with me on that, but I'm kind of just using that as maybe a recommendation I would make, or what I would do if I were on a nonprofit board is I would say, let's try to limit our search here to the fee-only advisors. And again, it's this process of elimination, much like the FI360 toolkit trying to screen out 40,000 investment managers. You gotta have some factors or something that you're going to use as quantitative criteria to reduce your search for a financial advisor. Avoiding the duly registered two-hat brokerage advisory firms will eliminate a lot of the financial advisory firms from your RFP pool of potential financial advisory firms, but you will still be left with a large number of fee-only financial advisory firms to consider. After eliminating both commission-based broker and duly registered two-hat broker advisors, you will want to consider eliminating the specific types of fee-only financial advisors who do not meet your needs and or preferences. A fee-only financial advisor can charge their advisory fees using various compensation methods, and you may choose to eliminate some of the fee-only financial advisory firms based on their preferred methods of compensation. Here are some examples of economic biases that you might encounter when selecting a fee-only financial advisor. It may help to eliminate the fee-only financial advisors who have economic biases that your nonprofit organization will want to avoid. Getting a promise of a fiduciary standard of care is important, so your organization should consider eliminating any financial advisory firm that is unwilling to promise a fiduciary standard of care in writing. To eliminate the conflicts of interest that will bias the advice of the financial advisor, eliminate financial advisors affiliated with custodians, brokerage firms, investment managers, asset managers, mutual funds, exchange traded funds. After eliminating all of these service providers, you'll be left with just investment advisors. And of those investment advisors, I kind of would group it into two categories of what you're going to have left is probably investment management consultants and then outsourced chief investment officers. At this point in time, you've reduced the list of potential financial advisors to include in your RFP significantly, but now you have to choose the advisor service type that you prefer. Step 10 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is choose the advisor service type you prefer to work with. This could include an advisor that I would say is holistic, looking at the balance sheet of the nonprofit organization, versus an account-specific advisor that might be looking at one account, for example, the 401k plan. Role of the advisor could be a manager making decisions on individual securities, or a consultant that might be more focused on the asset allocation process. Decision-making could be a discretionary investment advisor or a non-discretionary investment advisory relationship. Also, the opportunity here is for an outsourced chief investment officer. Another type of advisor would be the idea of a CFEX certified firm. So survey your board of directors and the investment committee for their input and their preferences, again, at the front end of the process. And then that will be used as you develop your RFP going forward. So our next survey question is, would you choose to limit your nonprofit RFP process to include only CFEX certified registered investment advisory firms? So again, if you're serving on a nonprofit board, or you're advising your friends who are volunteers on nonprofit boards, would you choose to limit that nonprofit RFP process to include only CFEX certified registered investment advisory firms? There's pros and cons to it, but just wondering what the audience is thinking about that issue. Take 10 seconds and answer yes or no on that. Okay, so far that comes down with about 75% would not limit their RFP process to include a CFEX certified firm. Just good to know that. That will come into play here later in the presentation. Step 11 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to choose an open or closed RFP process. Your nonprofit organization can choose an open RFP process to a very large number of financial advisory firms, which will result in a lot of work for your volunteer board members as they will need to review many RFP responses. A closed RFP process with a smaller curated list of pre-qualified firms might help you to keep your process easier to manage. I think that putting some time into creating the smaller list of pre-qualified financial advisory firms will pay dividends in the end for you and your volunteer board members. Step 12 in the internal preparation section of the nonprofit RFP process is to decide to do it yourself or to outsource the RFP process. If you choose to outsource all or a part of the management of your RFP process, you can find firms that will take on this type of project-based work. I personally would prefer to refer nonprofit organizations to financial professionals who are professionally trained in fiduciary best practices. So particularly the AIF and the AIFA designees and financial professionals working for CFEX certified firms. If any AIF or AIF designees on the call do this type of work helping nonprofits with RFPs, please let me know via an email, and I'd like to reconnect with you on that in the future. This white paper titled "Where are the Lay Fiduciaries" is available for download on the AdvisorSmart website. And basically, it's talking about the lay fiduciaries who serve in nonprofit boards, and they have a legal responsibility to manage investments prudently for the benefit of the nonprofit organization. In this research that I did with a couple others, Kate McBride and Alan Henriquez, a lot of nonprofit board members don't know that they're actually paying for advice. They think it's free. And so it's really important for you to educate the nonprofit, about what they know or what they don't know, and maybe they know what they don't know. But the decision about whether to do it yourself or outsource is take the temperature of the nonprofit board to see if they should be using outside experts just to manage their RFP process, much less hiring a financial advisor, which is a whole nother question. But I talked with two FI 360 designees that helped me with this presentation and actually helped nonprofits with the RFP process. The first is Mark Mensak, and he's at Prudent Champion. He's an accredited investment fiduciary analyst. Mark says that to run an RFP process all by yourself is fraught with challenges and political issues. And so he says, I will not tell you what to do, because you get to make all your own decisions. He goes, I'll tell you if you're doing something that contradicts the prudent practices. And so Mark recommends that a nonprofit organization limit their RFP process to only include CFEX certified firms. So he thinks he's picking out the pre-qualified firms that he believes are capable of doing the job. So he's a potential resource for a nonprofit that's looking for help managing an RFP. Next on my list is Larry Coates, President and CEO of Clearview Fiduciary Alliance. And let me see here if I've got my... Clearview Fiduciary Alliance is a membership organization of 80 nonprofit organizations. And what Clearview Fiduciary Alliance is putting together is a database of financial advisory firms that serve nonprofits. In this database, they built it up to 300 to 400 firms. And if you're working with nonprofits and you want to be part of the Clearview Fiduciary Alliance database, you can contact Larry and kind of submit a due diligence questionnaire to be part of their database. Again, Larry is another professional. He's an AIF designee, and he helps nonprofits with the RFP process to select a financial advisor. So another good resource. And as I say, if there are other AIF designees or AIFA designees that help with the RFP process to select financial advisors, let me know. And as I'm working on my book in the next year, I'm going to be reaching out to the AIF and AIFA designees to help me to really flesh out the details of this process of selecting a financial advisor. So that covers our first section on the internal preparations, which to me I think is the most important part of this presentation. And so now we're going to, as we've completed our extensive internal preparations, we're going to shift gears to the second phase of the nonprofit RFP process and focus on developing the RFP. Step one in the development of an RFP phase of the nonprofit process is to design your RFP project. This is going to be clarifying your timeline, your documentation plan, your selection criteria, your scoring worksheet. Shoot, ready, aim is the preparation part that we just talked about is getting really clear about what it is you're trying to do. And then now we're kind of in designing the execution plan to execute on the goals that you have. Step two in the development of your RFP, developing your RFP phase of the nonprofit RFP process is your RFP process timeline. Now there's two timelines. My big broad timeline is, I think it takes a nonprofit about 9 months to go through this whole process, because I think you need to spend a lot of time planning internally before you ever reach out to the outside world. Once you're doing the RFP timeline, you're also going to have, when you start interacting with the outside world, you have to allow sufficient time for people responding to your RFP to actually have enough time to do a good RFP response. This example is the timeline of the 9-month process, which is available, and I think I provided it as one of the PDF files. If not, it's available on the AdvisorSmart website. Step three in the developing your RFP phase of the nonprofit RFP process is to define your RFP process documentation plan. This is what you're going to, when you do an RFP, these are the things you're going to ask for in the RFP. And you have to be well documented about what you're asking for. And then when the advisory firms are coming back to you, you have to be clear about the documentation coming back, that it's accurate and it's what you're looking for. Step four in the process is to develop specific advisor selection criteria. Think back to the priorities you were talking about in the planning phase. What is the board looking for? What does the investment committee think they need? What does the staff think they need? And try to get your priorities first in order, and think about what matters most to your organization. Step five is to develop your RFP scoring worksheet. The scoring worksheet is how you're going to quantify the respondents' answers to each question. This is a more detailed look at the same document that might be helpful later if you look back at this PDF file. Step six is to develop your evaluation procedure. Will you demand complete responses? Will you eliminate partially completed responses? If RFP responses are incomplete, you have to decide what you're going to do with that particular response. Eliminate it or contact them and ask for more information. Step seven is to develop your RFP candidates. again, some organizations, they ask their board members for recommendations, or they go to the SEC website. And you could go to the SEC website and just download a list of all the advisory firms in the United States. As I said, that's drinking from the fire hose approach. But you have to come up with a way to determine your candidate pool of who are you going to send your RFP to. Step 8 is to prepare your request for information. Now, this is only, a request for information is only needed if you're overwhelmed with the number of advisory firms and you can't figure out how you're going to reduce the pool of advisory firms to a more manageable number. One of the things you could do is a very short one-page request for information could be to send out an email asking firms very simple questions like, will you accept a fiduciary relationship in writing? And if they come back and say no, you can eliminate them from your search. That's how you would use a request for information. Step 5 is to select your final candidates that you plan to send your RFP to, and you want to narrow your list to a curated list of a short list of viable candidates. Then you're going to create your RFP questionnaire, generating specific RFP questions to include in the RFP. AdvisorSmart created about 32 pages of questions to ask a nonprofit organization. You're obviously not going to ask 32 pages of questions, but it's kind of an inventory of questions that might be helpful to you as you're trying to develop your RFP and you're trying to come up with the wording for the questions that are important to your organization. Step 11 is prepare your request for proposals RFP document. Now is the time for you to draft the document. You want to keep it short. Step 12 is going into the process to issue your final RFP. You're going to send it out, distribute it to your curated list. And now the next question I have is for a survey question is, would you include a financial advisory firm that has ever been fined by a regulator for bad behavior in your nonprofit RFP process? So if you're on a nonprofit board, would you include a financial advisory firm that has ever been fined by a regulator for bad behavior? You could take 10 seconds and answer that question. This kind of gets into the idea of the factors of a process of elimination. You have to come up with some kind of factors, and this might be a potential factor, but it also, because big firms get fined for bad behavior, you got to be careful that you don't eliminate all of the firms in the United States, because a lot of them have been fined for bad behavior. Okay, I'm going to go back to this slide here. So we have about 84% would not eliminate a firm that has been fined by a regulator. So now let's go into, we've gone through the first two phases here. Now we're going to go into the process of selecting your advisor. Pretty easy. First is review your proposals. Your proposals are going to come in. Staff has to gather the proposals and record receipt before any stated deadlines. Staff should be keeping very good accounting records. Step 2 is to complete the RFP response summary. The staff is going to prepare the data summaries and then distribute documents to the RFP committee to get them ready for their deliberation meetings. This is a evaluation matrix that is kind of a simple matrix that you might consider using or adapting for your needs as evaluating the advisor responses. This is a more detailed look at the same document that might be helpful if you look at a document of this PowerPoint presentation later. Step 4 in the selecting your advisor phase of the nonprofit RFP process is to evaluate the proposals relative to your pre-established selection criteria. Again, start with the end in mind. The RFP meets to look at the score sheets, and they have to talk about, does this advisor, are these responses in alignment with what we're looking for? Step 5 is to select your advisors or your finalists. Now you'll be making the decision on your 3 to 5 finalists, whatever you want to decide on. You want to schedule an RFP committee meeting to narrow down the field to several, a limited number of finalists. Then you want to inform and update the board as needed, and then notify the non-finalists. And then you're going to invite your 3 to 5 finalists for formal in-person interview presentations. Now you're going to schedule the finalist and presentations, and most of the time people like to do face-to-face meetings. But apart from objective factors, considerations such as fit, the comfort level that you have on a personal basis with your provider can play an important part in your overall final decision. Step 7 is meeting preparation. You're going to request and check client references, and you're going to request sample service provider contracts. Then you're going to go step 8 into the interview the finalist part of the process. And these meetings can be the most important part of the process, since it's here that you should expect to encounter at least some of the individuals who would be actively working with your organization. And thus you can judge their fit with your committee, your staff, and your other organizations, other people in your organization. Step 9 in the process is to select your advisor. You'll now be making the decision. Now is the time for the committee to deliberate. Usually the RFP committee will meet to share their views of the finalist firms and make a selection of a new advisor to recommend to the board of directors. And it's okay to take the appropriate time to deliberate on this major and important decision. If you can, have your RFP committee select the financial advisor you plan to recommend to the board of directors. Step 10 is to check references. Now at this point, as you've reached close to the finish line, stay disciplined and perform a background check on your selected firm to avoid any unpleasant surprises in the future. Step 11 in the selecting your advisor phase is to have the RFP committee to present your recommendation to the board of directors. The RFP committee will now make their recommendation to the board of directors to retain the selected financial advisory firm and ask the board of directors to approve their recommendation to retain the new financial advisory firm. Step 12 is to transition the accounts. After board approval, you'll begin the transition process, inform the incumbent if there's a change, develop a transition plan, negotiate the contract, finalize the contract, execute the contract, transfer the assets. And that's an overview of a prudent process to select a financial advisory firm for a nonprofit organization. And now I'm just going to highlight some of the free educational resources available to you that I have previously mentioned in this presentation. There's some materials from FI 360 as well as CFEX. Advisor Smart has a lot of the materials that you saw in today's presentation. Allodium Investment Consultants is another resource, the firm I work at. Also Prudent Champion, which is Mark Mensak's firm, and also Clearview Fiduciary Alliance, which is Larry Coates' firm. Thank you for attending today's session. And now, if time permits, we'll open it up to any questions from the audience that have been submitted via the online chat functionality. And if you have any questions, go to the online chat. One of the first questions that someone asked is, are there any differences between advising a nonprofit organization and advising municipalities? Or I should better say, selecting a financial advisor for a nonprofit as opposed to one that is working with a municipality. And the comment I would make is that the RFP process that I outlined today in general is going to be very similar. Again, think about the FI 364 step process. The same process applies to all entities. And so the process is what's important. The difference between a municipality and a nonprofit is going to come down to the regulations of the municipality. So for example, in a nonprofit, you're going to have you have foundations, you have endowments, you have 501c3 organizations, you have lots of different types of charitable organizations, different entities. Nonprofits, there's dozens and dozens of different nonprofits under the IRS code. How a nonprofit is going to select an RFP, is going to go through an RFP process to select a financial advisor, is going to be heavily dependent on the state regulation of that particular type of entity. And so when you look at municipalities, city, even like looking at counties or states, the government entity is going to probably have a lot of regulations and rules about how does a municipality select a financial advisor. What do they have to do to make sure that they comply with the rules of the city about how they're going to select a vendor? And so that is, to me, kind of one of the most important differentiations between a municipality and a nonprofit organization. So let's see here for other questions. I don't see any other questions in the online chat, team chat. Let me go to the. So with that, I would say that thank you for participating in the call. I really appreciate FI 360 having me as a presenter today.
Very happy to have you. Thank you so much, Dave. We really, really appreciate your time. And as always, thank you to our audience for joining us today. Please provide feedback on today's session and ideas for future webinars through the short survey at the end of the webinar. And with that, we'll conclude today's session. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.